All right, welcome back to another devlog. This is number 46. Um, I've been doing some stuff this week and a little bit of a change this week, which I welcome. I started off the week on Monday finishing up the actual room 5 here. So, going through my whole process and and finalizing this entire room here with details and floor decals and making sure all the transitions and everything is, meets the standards of the other room. So got all that done. I broke the stairwell along the way. I still have to fix up something wrong with the mesh collider here, but I added the upper floor and made sure the camera works for their two level room. So got that done on Monday. Pretty much the same work as I've been doing, kind of monotonous. But I did come to a few problems in this room here. Um, so what I was noticing in this hallway in particular, I was using my standard dither fade, um, and for some reason, if you look closely, it looks okay when you use dither fade here. But for some reason, when I was using it in this section here, you were seeing this very odd kind of flashing. It wasn't like a smooth fade out to nothing. It was like it just kind of flickered and it showed odd artifacts and it wasn't very nice. So I decided to take another crack at it, and instead of using dither fade, I decided to go with the alpha fade. I had trouble with alpha fade before, and alpha fade has its own problems. As you can see, right now I'm spotting something that's not quite perfect. You can see these shadows here on. So it takes a lot of fine tuning, but I think it actually works. When it does work, it's working acceptably, where it fades out and it doesn't add a lot of dithering artifacts. Um, so I did it for this one, and that's fine. Um, but I was polishing up like the camera fade through, and I was having to do add like a camera fade to kind of objects that had a lot of materials, and I did it painstakingly for this one object, but this whole process is like I recognize this, it takes a lot of work to make make an object with a lot of materials, convert each one of those materials into a new kind of shader that supports dither fade. And you kind of have to painstakingly go in and assign each, it's like a process, you have to assign each texture map and go and for every property, set the right values and do it for like, 5 to 10 different materials. And it's just a pain, and it's like, and every time you encounter a new object you want to apply that shader to, you have to do it. And it's okay, you can get it looking close enough to the original, and that's fine, but the whole process of converting an object with um, multiple materials is really you know, there has to be a better way, right? So another one where I had to implement an alpha fade is this hallway here, right? And so I went and did that again, but this time it's more complicated. I had to, instead of a camera dither fade, I had to apply an alpha fade to this pillar here, and this pillar has, you know, the same amount of materials that need to be converted to a different shader. And you know, doing a wall, it just has one material, or doing another wall, it's simple one material. I can do that no problem. But if I'm having to like constantly encounter situations where like, oh, I need to apply alpha fade to a complex material object, I needed a way to kind of expedite that. So with AI's help, I went and wrote this little script here, and basically you can pop in the game object and it'll go ahead and generate the particular alpha fade materials. I had to go through each one of the properties and test that it would translate setting the base map, the metallic map, and all the all the properties I could, you know, automatically automation, and then apply it to the actual. And this is kind of the result. Like, it looks mostly the same, and it's good. It's pretty good. Then I can apply those materials to the object, and then there's a couple things you need to batch apply in order to get it right. So I actually wrote a little note down here. The cool thing is that this little script here is for the alpha fade shader. I can go ahead, if I needed to, kind of take the same concept and apply it to maybe if I needed to do an object that had to entirely support camera dither fade, right? Or any other shader material, I can kind of do the same thing here. And what this does, it kind of it takes it automates 80% of the work, and I still had to go into this object and kind of fine tune each of the materials because it wasn't quite perfect in its settings. But eventually the other 20% manual work, like at least I didn't have to sit here and assign each of the texture maps, and so in the end it was worth it, but it doesn't do the whole job. But that's fine. Like, at least I can like offload a lot of the repetitive work to a script, and that's, you know, that's what you want to do. So next time I encounter an object I need to support for an alpha fade, it's not going to be so much tedium, right? Um, so so yeah, so on Monday and Tuesday I finished up this room here. Um, and on Wednesday I began the work of, so I was pretty much done with the actual first scene of the level, and I wanted to turn to making the next scene, which is the basement floor, but I needed a way to actually travel to the basement floor from this scene. So I hacked apart this wall. This is where the stairwell will go, and I went and made a stair prefab. This needs a little bit more work, but this is just under construction. I'll add back the walls and everything, but this is the concept. And I had to go back and, because I did some prototype work originally in anticipation that I would need to load between scenes in the level. And going back to that code, going back to that work, revisiting the actual devlog of like, what did I do? Because it's been months since, like, how did this work? I kind of refreshed my knowledge in the actual inter scene loading when you're inside the game, not the game start load, but loading in between scenes when you're inside the game. And so I got all that like refreshed in my memory, but the problem with my prototype was that I had been testing loading these like lightweight levels, like little didn't have many objects, didn't have many lights or shadows or anything like that. It's a very lightweight prototype levels, and I was like, not knowing a lot back then, I was like, oh, these load quickly, these load quickly, so I can make these addressables. Addressables helps, but even with addressables, it was kind of like, oh, I could load, I could actually stream the scenes in, with addressables, and there's no frame hitch, right? Um, Before I started, I kind of knew that's not actually going to apply here because, you take a look at um, the entire level. There is a lot here. This is not this is not a lightweight prototype level that you can easily just, switch between and have no frame rate dip. It's not going to happen. So I knew that wasn't the way, and I knew that. So my prototype kind of made the assumption that we're going to hold the player's current scene in memory, and we're going to hold the adjacent scenes in memory as well. And from an efficiency standpoint, that doesn't make sense. Could you imagine, if you're on the first level and you have a basement level and a level on top, floor two, all of the same size of this level, all in memory at the same time. I mean, that is, you're not using either floor, but it's in memory. That's not. So my prototype, it was built around the assumption of that you could do that, but in reality, I knew that for like this is kind of gonna be like a model for a standard size scene of a level, and in order to do that, I knew that you're probably only gonna have one scene loaded in at one time. So this stairway is the transition here, and so I began like, kind of planning my refactor of the original loading. I pretty much had to clean it all out because none of it really applied, and I had to kind of refactor and like, not delete the code, but use it as a model of what I'd done before for reference, but basically revalidate and rewrite the functionality of how this should behave, because it's almost like none of my prototype work for scene loading was really applicable. And that's kind of the danger, when you do prototype work, you have this vision of how it will work, but when you get into actual production, like the actual game, it's a whole different thing. So you can go too far with prototypes, preempt the system work, but that's just the way it goes. It's not like I didn't learn anything from that experience. I learned how, the intricacies of scene loading and efficiency with addressables and stuff, and there's a lot of valuable stuff of what I did in the prototype work that I applied here. So I'm not starting from zero, but as far as the actual functionality for loading between in this production level, it's a whole new context. Um, so what I've done here, I have my stairwells, and instead of building the basement level, what I've done is actually copied a new scene, just a test scene that will be loaded. And I have this whole new kind of mechanism. Um, this, in a sense, is like a new prototype as well, like, functional, but perhaps flawed. The more you look at it, and the more the design. But at the end of the week, I was able to get it working, but it was not without its challenges for sure. It was nice to have a diversion from what I've been doing from for the last several weeks of just level construction over and over again, and to actually working on this coding again, and system functionality and design. So that was nice, but by the end of Thursday, I had it 90% working, or so I thought. But on Friday, it kind of got out of hand where I was kind of getting a little desperate, and I was using coroutine, so that means every change you make, hot reload is not going to help you out. You have to wait and compile. So it's a kind of a painstaking process of testing, and so I was finding out. So let's review the new system here. I have these stairs, and then what we have here is a scene connector, which is a mesh. You cross over this, and it's pretty much a one-way. So if you travel through it in this direction, it'll trigger, but not if you're coming back to the scene. If you go the other way, it won't trigger. Um, so I decided to go to this like transfer platforms route. I could have, when you cross this trigger, I could have froze the character in place. But instead of doing that, I decided to implement code to actually, um, when you cross this, it'll actually throw you in this little box. I just took the walls with the colliders and put it a blackout material. It'll throw you in there. You're pretty much in there, and then through a crazy process, um, in the so one of the things I'm doing now is I'm beefing up the level manager. I've taken out. I had an old script that is called Scene Loader, and I pretty much refactored to transpose that functionality to the level manager. So pretty much now I've designated the level manager's responsibilities as the one who actually um, loads the scenes of the level. He manages the loading. So it's like the scene loader. So there's some functionality in Game Manager that I want to transfer to the level manager. So the Game Manager can talk to the level manager, the level one. It can instruct it, but level manager's responsibility is to actually, load in between the scenes or reload the scenes. The Game Manager's responsibility is not really to do that anymore. He's going to transfer that responsibility to the level manager. But so this level manager, when you cross over the trigger, there's a whole process, and it's kind of like before where there's many steps to the process, and I had to go through and get it right. A lot of system asynchronous loading of the scene, and just a ton of testing to get this whole process right, and perhaps a little bit of hackery. What happens? I did a lot of testing and investigation, but something happens when you load the new scene for like a frame. The Cinemachine brain gets confused, and it doesn't matter the priority. It'll actually set the VCAM, to the first VCAM it finds. So in order to get around that, I'd rather, I built the camera kind of a blind box, so I can flip it on and off, and instead of using a canvas, because I might want to do VR, it pretty much puts the camera in a little black box. You just blinds, it can't see. So there's a little bit of a process between transitions that it will black the camera out so you can't see anything, and then it'll re-enable it at the appropriate time. So basically what happens, the whole process, you cross this, it'll throw you into a constraint. You can still move around, but you're kind of in a little constrained box here. And the virtual camera will move from the original scene 8 position down through the floor. The floor is actually a dither. So it'll move through the floor into blackness, right? So you can't see anything. And that's when the transition happens. So you're not seeing any frame freezing. You're just in blackness. And once the new scene is loaded, it actually sets the Cinemachine camera to cut from its position down here up here. So the Cinemachine is now in a new virtual camera. It's up here, directly cut. No, it's not going to blend through and move up there. It's right here. And it's still blacked out, so it doesn't look like anything's happened, but now the camera's up here. And I think that, yeah, um, when that happens, this new scene loads, it'll actually send you, where is it? Um, it'll transfer the player from this confined box down here to, where is it? Yeah, this one doesn't have any blackout, but it'll pop him here temporarily. And then I think what happens is then either I set the player, no, I think actually the next step is then I call a VCam transition, and it will transition through this kind of blackout pipe, and the bottom of the floor is a camera dither. So it kind of looks like you're coming through the ceiling, and then you're in the new level. And then the last step is to place, take the player out from this box and place them at the designated position here, and then everything's done. And pretty much the same thing in reverse. There was some fine tuning to do in reverse when you go back up here, but it's pretty much the same process. It'll throw you in here, it'll reverse transition up through the ceiling, it'll load the scene, and then put you down here, switch. So there's a several step process, and it works, and it's tested to work. The major issue I was running into, there's a few problems because my original, I made some mistakes with the original functionality of the logic. Um, Now I'm accounting for, this is why some things you can't say find all objects of type in scene. I kind of had to scope it by scene because some of my logic was getting messed up because at one point you'd have, two scenes with, sectors, and things were going kind of haywire. So I had to tighten things up. I was getting a lot of strange errors. So my system was not compatible, and it was built from a perspective of only a single scene. But once you start to throw the complication of switching in between scenes, things get out of order, and you have to fix a lot of stuff, and things aren't working as they should. And um, so a lot of problems I can check out. The major problem was managing the actual um, who, the VCam priority. It's not the VCam. It has to be carefully managed, and so I had to do a lot of, really solid, like, make sure that, really clean up the actual VCam priority setting management and the VCam initialization. um, I kind of came to a brick wall because one of the weird issues is, like, when you're starting on the first level, for like debugging purposes, you want to say, okay, the initial camera is, camera 8, start the game here. Or if you're starting from the game screen, you say that the initial camera is way over here, But now with scene loading, if you're going back to the original scene, the initial camera is not here, and it's not at the very beginning of the level. The initial camera is going to be this little constrained platform, right? And the system, what I couldn't figure out is for the the scene manager, like, because the actual data is hard coded in the scene, so you could tell it, what the initial camera is, but it's like, how do you dynamically tell the scene, which camera is the initial camera to start on? And it's a very tricky problem, but basically what you have to do, especially for this first level, you have to go in and save the scene in the state you want it to load in, all the while running the scene in a different state that you want to start up in the editor. That way, because when the new scene loads, there's no way to intercept the scene and say, oh, I want you to configure your data a little differently for this load than what you have saved. It'll actually do whatever it's saved, and it'll just process right away. So there was a lot of confusion about, how to set um, the initial VCAM controller to go to do it correctly, and just yeah, it was a mighty technical challenge, but eventually I got it working. So there, there's some limitations. I got it working to where it can be functional in the game, but there's some caveats when you're using it in like an editor testing context where you kind of have to be aware of it. There's no way around this to like program some sort of convenience to where you're not shooting yourself in the foot during testing and development. You kind of have to be aware, like, oh, why didn't it load the right initial camera? Oh, because the editor, auto saved the scene, and when you tried to load it up again, um, yeah, it used the version of that saved scene. So you kind of have to know why it's going wrong, and that there's, you have to follow a certain procedure. Um, that can work in production, but it's not friendly to working in production and the editor at the same time. So you kind of have to be aware of that. But it is functionality solved. So until I figure out a way to actually load a scene but configure the data before anything happens on screen, there's no way to intercept that process that I know of. In my limited knowledge and experience, but anyways, it behaves like it should. It loads between the different scenes. Um, and you kind of have to save your scenes for production in the state that's optimized for loading. I found that um, if you enable all the sectors and save it, next time you load it, it takes a lot longer than a scene loaded with no sectors enabled. But there's different, as far as the loading process goes, there's different things that need to happen. So I just have to make sure everything happens correctly in between the scenes and everything's loaded properly. But for the most part, this is working how it should. I have this model here, and this can be used in between scene loading and floor. So you don't see any frame drop, FPS drop, because you're in blackness, and it has a cool little transition like you're moving in between floors. And this is what we're going for. And I think there's always things you're gonna spot, but I think the system's intact, and I think it's safe to tidy some things up with this wall, put things back together. But this is pretty much the functionality to transition between different scenes in the game, and this will work for me. Yeah, there could be more work and fine tuning, but this is, it's pretty much working for the most part. And I got that done by the end of the day on Friday. I'm pretty satisfied with it. I might spot some other things along the way that something's not working or have to fix this as long. But because there's a lot of, when you're adding different scenes and loading, there's a lot of different complications with, objects not being loaded properly, or, this and that. So it just takes a lot of testing and make sure everything's working good. But eventually you get it working to an acceptable degree. That was Friday, and that's what I worked on. Next week I'll be tackling the first, the second scene, basement level, and yeah, it'll be good. So thanks for tuning in, and I think we'll catch you next time. See you later. Bye.